Hi, welcome to Color Me Happy, Ecot's excellent art show. I am excited that you are watching, and I've got some cool art projects for you today. We're going to work with common everyday watercolors and science to create some spring flower themed watercolor paintings. So I've got a couple examples of what we are doing today that I have worked on, prepared for today. We've used a couple different watercolor brands. I'll get into that when we get started with our materials. But just some ideas of what we're working on. Because it is springtime, it's warm, and we have things blooming everywhere, so I have some reference images here too to help inspire me as I am working. So let's get some materials together. We need some normal things and some things you might be like, why do we need that? And I will explain that to you. So first and foremost, we of course need watercolors. These particular ones are Crayola watercolors. They're the regular ones you can get at the grocery store. Nothing fancy. I found that these actually work best for this project. I used some fancy watercolors that were a little bit more expensive, and they did not work as well as the kind of everyday Crayola watercolors. So just a tip for that. You'll need a cup with water to make the watercolors work. I've got watercolor paper as well. This particular brand is what I'm using, but you can find watercolor paper lots of different places and lots of different styles. It's thicker paper. We talked a little bit about it last time. So it does hold the color better. If you use watercolor paper rather than printer paper, it gets soggy and icky. On our sort of stranger end of materials, we need table salt today, and rubbing alcohol, glue, I've got some Q-tips, and also a white crayon, again, just regular standard crayons, and of course, brushes. When we're painting, we need our watercolor brushes. So the technique that we are working on today is called a watercolor resist. This is where the science part comes in. A resist is where the watercolor paint, because it is water-based, does not stick to certain areas of the painting. And we can manipulate this in kind of crazy, interesting ways that make neat textures and help us maybe be more exact when we're drawing something and we want our paint just to be in certain little areas. We'll get to play a little bit with that in 4 different ways today. So the first technique I'm going to show you is the one with glue. So I've got my examples here that I've done with glue, and you can see that I have my flower drawn out with the glue, and that makes it so the paint isn't sticking to the glue, which is helpful, you know, when I want to show my design there. It's resisting, it's not absorbing into the paper where the glue has dried. This is my other example that I did, like I said, with the more fancy watercolors, and it didn't show up as well. So again, I'm liking this one a lot better. Do some experimenting on your own, figure out what you like best. So let's set up this painting. And the first thing we need to do, of course, is grab our glue and draw out what we are working on today. So for my example, maybe I'll just draw this flower. I think for my other examples, I was doing the daffodil. So I'm just gonna play with that image and my glue. The thing about this project is with the glue, it's actually pretty easy to see where you're drawing with it. Not so much with the white crayon, but we'll get into that. So what I'm doing is just going to draw out my flower and make the shapes that I want to be in the plant. So maybe you can see it. I've got my little petals there and my stem. And maybe a little leaf here. So at this point, you really want to make sure this dries. You can already see mine's dripping a little bit. You want to make sure it dries, because if you start painting when it's not dry, not only will the paint stick to the glue, you'll also get a clogged paintbrush, which is no good. So I have, of course, prepared one that is already dry that we can work on today. So that's exciting. So the next step in the process, once you have your dried glue, you have your flower or whatever design you want to do. This does not have to be a flower, but it maybe would be fun to be themed that way. You want to start adding paint to this design. So I have brought a couple different brushes here, big ones, little ones, and I think, yeah, really small one here. This technique allows you to not be super exact with where your paint is going because the glue is helping to control it. Again, it's resisting that part of the paper. So I'm gonna grab some water, and the thing with watercolor is that you want to add water to these watercolors to make the little watercolor cake wet. That's what activates the paint. That's why it works. So if you try to dry brush watercolor, it's not gonna come off the palette there for you. So I can start adding color to my design here, and it's going to slightly, as I said, resist where the paint or where the glue is. And the cool thing about this too is that you can just grab different colors and kind of mix them on the paper. It doesn't have to be real exact. You'll find on this show I like a lot of artwork that doesn't have to be really exact, and it's kind of a surprise how it comes out. I think that's some of the most fun type of art. Doesn't have to be nitpicky. You don't have to be perfect. My mom always used to tell me art made by accident was sometimes the best art there was. So have fun with it. Play with where the paint is going. And, you know, sometimes maybe it's a surprise how it turns out, and that's all right. So I'm gonna start adding some green on the bottom. You can see, since I'm holding it up for you, we do have a little dripping going on. That's okay. Don't cry over spilled paint, you know. So I'm just gonna add some more color here. I've got some big leaves and some little leaves. Different shades of green that I can grab. I just think it's fun to mix it right on here. If you prefer to make a particular color, you can also just mix it on the lid of the watercolor. So if I wanted to, I could get my brush wet, get some color, put it on the lid of the watercolor and grab the other color I wanna mix, and it would just mix really nicely on that plastic lid. So that, use the tools that you have in front of you. All right, so I've got my flower now, and what I wanna do next is add a background. And in the background, we're gonna look at another style of resisting, another style of the paint not sticking certain places where we want it to. The one I'm gonna look at for this is with salt, and I'll show you what that is. But first, I need to add some more paint to my background. When we add big areas of paint in a watercolor, it is called a wash. When we are grabbing our big brush and really getting a lot of color in a big area, that is called a wash. So to do a wash, I'm just gonna start adding paint and water to my background, and I'm gonna leave it pretty wet. It might drip a little bit. You probably won't be holding yours up, so it'll be a little bit flatter on your table, a little less messy. All right, so starting to get my background. I keep going back to the water cup if you notice, grabbing lots of paint and lots of water, because the more water, the more paint I get, and also more light the color, the value of the paint is. So if you want light blue, you know, you can add more water to it to get a lighter shade of blue. Or as we like to call it in the art classroom, a lighter value of blue. So now I've got my background. I've got a lot of blue. It's not perfect again. We're just playing, and that is okay. Now we get to do some magic with the salt. I'm gonna put my painting down, and I'm gonna just put a little bit of salt in my hand here. Ooh. And I'm gonna sprinkle this salt on my painting. And I'll show you how it looks after I get some of that on there. All right, so once you put the salt on your painting, you start to get these little tiny dots. I've seen people use them to kind of rough up the texture of the background, or it kind of looks like, you know, I don't know, bubbles or something. It's just kind of a really interesting texture. You'll see that the paint is sticking really well to the salt. It's making little dark blue areas. And what that's doing is it's basically sucking up all the water. So the salt is taking that water, and that's why you'll see a little concentration here wherever the salt is to make that texture. When it dries, you're left with little white dots where the salt was. So actually when it dries, you can rub the salt off the paper, and then you're left with this really interesting technique. Again, another style of resist. So pretty neat. So that is resist technique 1 and 2. Now we've got the other one I wanted to show you today involves crayon. Crayon and rubbing alcohol. So we'll go into that. But crayon to start off our design. So to start off my design with this time, instead of doing the glue as you saw, I actually did white crayon. So the wax in the white crayon will block the paint from sticking to the paper wherever I put it. So I could write something, I could draw something, could write my name and do a really neat painting that way. So to start that kind of process, I would just take my white crayon here and my watercolor paper. And I'm gonna do another flower design, just a quick flower design as I did before. And a word of caution, with the white crayon, it is very, very hard to see. Can hold it up here. Impossible, practically, to see what's going on in the paper. So, you know, just guess. If you can't thoroughly see your design, that's okay. It might be a surprise. I like surprises. Let there be surprises in your art. So I've got my flower drawn, believe it or not, with my white crayon. Now the paint you're going to see is not going to stick to that area. Again, the wax is blocking it from being absorbed into the paper. Science. So again, I'm going to take my brush here, and this time maybe I'll make like a purple flower. I've been doing yellow and orange flowers in my other example here, so maybe I'll do a little purple instead this time. So even as I paint, you can see white lines shining through. Now I think that the watercolor resist with the crayon actually, you know, seems to work better even than the glue. But again, it's easier to see what you're drawing with the glue, so, you know, there's lots of different ways to do it. Play with it and see what you can make. This is kind of a fun experiment to do in your free time. So I'm just mixing my blues and purples and kind of going a little bit closer to the edge than I normally would, because I want you guys to really see it not sticking to that area. So super fun to play with. Might be a little drippy there. So back to my stem here, I'm gonna go ahead and add green. Maybe this time I'll have a yellow background or an orange background so it contrasts with my flower. It's a very different color than my flower. Again, we're gonna do the watercolor wash, adding color to a big area. So we'll go with orange and hope we get what we want here. Now, the next watercolor resist I'm gonna show you actually does well if the paint's a little dry. So I'm not going to, not all the way dry, just a little bit. So I'm using a little bit less water with my paint this time, and I'm allowing it to be less saturated with water than I did the first time. The first time with the salt, I wanted that to be nice and wet so that it did the salt resist the way that I wanted it to. Maybe we'll do a little red. We can make sure that we see the part that we're adding. Again, super fun just to mix the colors on your paper. Don't feel like you have to mix it beforehand. You just don't know what you're gonna get with watercolors. And that's pretty fun. Unless it makes you nervous, then mix the colors on the lid if that makes you feel better and you want a little more control of what shade you're getting. So we have a very impressionist style flower here. It's a little crazy color-wise, but that's all right. We're going to now add the other style of resist. And this one requires rubbing alcohol, just like you would maybe see in a first aid kit. Nothing fancy there. And I'm gonna use a Q-tip. So what I will do now is open up my rubbing alcohol here, and I'm just gonna dip my Q-tip right in the bottle and then start dropping little droplets of the rubbing alcohol right onto my paint. Which creates a very interesting effect I will show you in a moment. This one is sort of bubbly as well, but more circular than we played with the others. It's kind of a neat chemical reaction between water and rubbing alcohol. All right, so now I have these really cool polka dots because the rubbing alcohol is repelling the water, and so it's leaving me these very interesting alien-like circles. So something fun to play with there as well. My other examples, you can see, these ones are a little bit light. Again, like I said, this was kind of the fancy watercolors. And, here's my other example. This one, the watercolor was a little bit less dry. It was more wet. So I've got sort of, the polka dots are a little less, they don't have a halo effect. This one sort of has a little bit more of a halo effect. Really light circle, not as light circle in the middle. So, experiment, really play with it and see what you can come up with. So those are the 4 resist techniques that I wanted to show you today. Do with these whatever, you would like to create. Like I showed you flowers today, but you can make your own ideas and your own compositions, your own pieces of artwork by using these techniques in a variety of ways. So if you try this at home, I would love to see it. Go ahead and post to social media with the hashtag ColorMeHappy so that we can see the excellent art that you make, and we'll see you next time.